Greetings, everyone. My name is Aaron Dworkin. I am the founder of the Sphinx Organization and serve as a professor of arts, leadership, and entrepreneurship at the University of Michigan. And I am so proud to be welcoming you to the Rising Tide Summer Symposium 2021 Sound Bites. Of course, Sphinx has been very excited and honored to be able to be part of Rising Tide's success and supporting them through the Sphinx Tank program. And I just think that this symposium is going to provide an extraordinary opportunity to not only hear about and learn about all of these issues surrounding diversity that we're going to cover, but thinking about how we can really address these in all of our own institutions and in our own work. You know, oftentimes we can look at the world around us and be frustrated by either the lack of progress or the seeming lack of opportunity for so many people to be able to bring their work to light, for young people to be able to be exposed and to learn diverse repertoire. And so ultimately, there are ways we can affect that. We don't have to just sit back and be frustrated. There are institutions like Rising Tide who can help empower us to actually be able to make a difference, to be able to hopefully rise the tide amongst all of the work that we do, all of the institutions within which we interact. So I know that all of you as participants are going to leave further informed and empowered related to these issues of diversity, inclusion, and social justice in music spaces. And I encourage you during this time to connect with others. I think one of the best ways for us to truly accomplish this work is never alone, but always through partnership, always through collaboration. So hearing what others are doing, seeing the impact that others have been able to achieve, and seeing how does that tie into your own work, to your own aspirations, and hopefully ultimately be inspired by the Rising Tide Summer Symposium 2021. I hope all of you are going to join me and just, I think, feel the sense of connectivity and opportunity that Soundbites has to offer. Look forward to seeing you in the sessions.
Welcome, excuse me, welcome and good morning, everyone. It is early, clearly early when I've got still a frog in my throat this morning. So excited to see so many of us here for this opening session. This is the inaugural public event for Rising Tide Music Press. This is our summer symposium, our first annual unofficially. The theme is Sound Bites, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But first, like I said, I want to welcome you all. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your work in this area to date. You're here because this means something to you. You're here because you want to do more. And so we are so excited to be your collaborator and your co-conspirator in this, and hope that you get something throughout today that you can take and use right now. Not only to kind of support change in your spaces, but also to support the changes that are happening in your own personal mindset as you continue on this road. So we want to thank you so much. I want to thank Aaron Dworkin for that wonderful welcome. And I want to just thank some folks up top. Thank the Sphinx Organization for selecting Rising Tide Music Press as a Sphinx Tank grant recipient. It's given us the seed funds that we need in order to keep ourselves going for a couple of years, which is really exciting. I just also want to announce that toward the end of this calendar year, we're going to have our very first virtual gala, which will be an effort to match the funds from Sphinx Tanks. So, and all of this will allow us to operate in this no profit consignment model that supports the composers that we are working with. So just giving you a little bit of a kind of a teaser as to what might be coming. Brianna will tell you more about that at some point today. As we move through the day, keep your eye on the chat. We're going to be posting things there, questions, resources, etc. So, keep your eye there. We'll also be inviting people to pop things into the chat. The chat is your friend. Keep an eye on that. I want to also thank a couple of more folks before we begin. Rising Tide Music Press is a 501c3 project, a charity project of Jones Creative and Consulting. It is sponsored by Fractured Atlas, which is an amazing company that does great work in terms of providing artists with access to nonprofit spaces. So we're very pleased about that. And I would love to thank my team, who you'll meet throughout the day, and I'll thank them more formally at the end. But it is a pleasure to work every day with these bright minds, this fresh energy, and all again in support of the composers that we serve. So with that, I would like to introduce you to the first member of my team to speak today. This is Brianna Owens. She's going to let you know how things are running. Take it away, Brianna.
Hi, everyone. Give me just a second to pull up my doc. All right, so I'm the client and PR coordinator for Jones Creative, and I'm also the social media coordinator for Rising Tide Music Press. So just to give you an overview of the day, we're going to start out with our coffee and conversation just to get us set up for the day. At 10:45, we're going to have our morning catalog showcase, which is the first of 3 concerts that will showcase the works of our composers. At 11:30, host Denise Bird will interview our featured composer, Alonzo Malik Pirio, in the discussion Making a Way Out of No Way, to discuss gatekeeping in music. At 12:30, we will have a panel for Turning the Ship in K-12 Music Making, where we will discuss culturally responsive practices. And then we will have a lunch concert at 1:30 for our midday catalog showcase. After that, we will talk with the Rising Tide General Manager, Ashley Killam, and 4 superstar trumpet players for our session, Diversifying Your Stand. After that, we will have a Rising Tide Composers Roundtable at 3:30, where we will hear from our composers as they join our founder and publisher, Alyssa Jones, to discuss why they joined Rising Tide and how they will continue to move forward on their individual paths. Then we will wrap up at 4:30, and the closing performance will be at 4:50 to present works by today's featured composer, Alonzo Malik Pirio. Stick around after that to join us in a happy hour at 5:30 to network with our composers and resource partners. Don't forget that all of today's events will be recorded for public access, and they will be available through the end of August. Also, if everyone could leave off their cameras and mics until it's time for the Q&A portion of each session. And if we could also just respect the ending times of all of the sessions so that the next speakers have enough time to work through any technical difficulties. And I will post our red carpet step and repeat wall in the chat so that if you'd like, you can use that as your Zoom background, take a selfie, post it on social media, and I will reshare it. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you, Brianna. Just want to highlight the recording. All of this content will eventually be available on our YouTube channel that we will be launching this fall. So if you are not interested in having your likeness on any of this, go ahead and leave your cameras off, even during Q&As. If you prefer also to not have your voice involved, type your questions in the chat and someone will read them for you. But if you're a ham and you want to be on the show, go ahead and put your cameras on when we call for everyone to join us. I realize that I've neglected to introduce my own self. My name is Alyssa Jones and I'm the founder and publisher of Rising Tide. I was just so excited. I just launched right in. One of the things that I get so excited about is the work that we do around culturally responsive practice And with the opening of Rising Tide, I've moved all of my work as an independent consultant into this space because it is so applicable. And that has afforded me the opportunity to meet some really amazing people. And our opening speaker is no exception. Our website is your conference program, so I'm going to invite you to go there for bios, etc., so that we can keep our time moving, because we want to have plenty of time for y'all to connect during our chat portion of this coffee meeting. But Dr. Deborah Confredo is with the music education department at Temple University. And we have become fast friends as co-conspirators in this work, colleagues in music education, and just Northerners who are now living in the Southland. So I want to turn it over to Deb to just kind of get us set up and share a little bit of her thoughts around the work that we are collectively doing.
Thank you, Alyssa. That was a lovely introduction, and Alyssa's absolutely right. We have become fast friends in work that is incredibly important. I appreciate being invited to speak to all of you today. Good morning, everyone. Now, look, if you haven't had a chance to read my bio, that's okay. I'm going to just tell you up front that my entire life has been in the classroom or on stage on the podium. Right. So I am going to be coming to you for the next several minutes from that perspective. All right. So here's your teacher talking to you. And Alyssa, I know will give me the high sign if I go long, because as a college professor, you know how college professors are, we tend to get on a roll. So if you came here today to sit back and open your heads like vessels for the good stuff to get poured in, then I should probably tell you that's not how this is going to roll. Yes, we'll have conversations that will be pointed and poignant and meaningful. And I guarantee that you will be riveted, but your role is not so much as a passive vessel to be filled, but more as a match that we want to get ignited during the day. So each of us, you, me, everybody here, we're going to roll up our sleeves today to do good, hard, and necessary work towards equity, access, and agency for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian music makers. We need your heads and hearts to be all in, even if you only say one thing all day, even if you only ask one question today, even if you only post one thing in the chat, participate. This symposium today that's been put together by the Rising Tide Music Press and Alyssa Jones is for you. So participation is a good thing. Let's talk for a little bit about privilege and barriers. Privilege for each of us as individuals exists on a continuum. It's influenced by a ton of factors in our lives. Just for example, race, wealth, gender, physical attributes, physical abilities, intellectual abilities, where you live. Alyssa just said we're transplanted Northerners now living in the South. Geographic location is part of that combination, that equation as well, that has to do with privilege. So all those things taken together gives us this continuum, a normal curve, if you will. And lots of folks sit on the high end of that normal curve. Privilege, therefore, privilege should be synonymous then with social justice and responsibility. It should be. And sadly, it's not. It is among some people, but we can't say that that's the case for all of us in this country. Privilege and therefore opportunity have been shaped in this country. I'm going to talk specifically about the United States because that's our backyard, right? It's been shaped by history and tradition. We confront that history and tradition in the incontrovertible white Eurocentrism of the musical canon of the United States. Now, you and I all know that there have been some efforts to bring light to music outside of this canon, but they've often been weak and insubstantial. And then the weakening sometimes is not due to the people who are trying to push it. The weakening is often due to the people outside trying to suppress it. And this often results in othering, which relegates those works to mere curiosities, outliers, that when programmed do more to sometimes soothe the conscience of the programmer who's satisfied with having checked off a box in the act of tokenism than to teach open minds and serve as important works of human creation. I am generalizing. I own that. I'm sure there's a lot of people who would argue with my take on it, but I own that take because I believe that to be more what's going on than not, unfortunately. In the schools across the United States, ensemble directors often, sometimes unwittingly, perpetrate this problem, turn to lists to assist them in the development of their curriculum. So let's talk about curriculum for a minute. Now, sometimes when I use the curriculum word, eyes roll and kind of glaze over, but stick with me, it's very short. Our music, the works that we teach, are a large part of the curricular materials we turn to when teaching our young musicians. And when we consider this issue of equity from that perspective, equity becomes an even greater concern in my estimation. Think about that. It is the curriculum, the things that young children are weaned on as they come up through the schools to become music appreciators, music doers, music consumers. What music then will be chosen to become that which shapes the now and the future of our musical community as a whole? Who will be those composer heroes? Who will our children learn of? And what kind of musics will be chosen that will be part of their lives' soundtracks? It is that important. As educators, we have a lot of power in helping to shape what happens now that leaks then into the future. So let's go back to lists. What's wrong with lists, right? Everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but lots of people in education rely on lists. Why? Because teachers, as we all know, are overwhelmed with work, right? There's lots to do. And so we're always looking for things that may make our lives a little bit easier. So somebody has a list, here we go, here's the literature I should select. What's the genesis of those lists? Well, state festival performance lists. Right? So we have, state by state, not every state has them, but many do. Music distributors curate lists as well. Now think about that. Music distributors whose main focus then is to sell music, right? And they collect those and distribute those lists. Academicians have lists and have created lists for different reasons. In my estimation, and I'm going to put something out there that's a little uncomfortable. These lists, because of their nature, are inherently flawed. Now, I've got a lot of friends who sometimes sit on these list-making committees, and I apologize if some of you are part of that, but you need to hear this as well. Those people, those well-meaning people who sit on those committees often create and revise these lists based on any number of arbitrarily determined factors of compositional quality, right? We all want our students to perform and listen to and engage in good music. But what music makes it to those committees? Now think about that. There are lots and lots of composers, not just the very few that we see publishing companies go to over and over and over again. There are lots of composers that are out there doing this good work. Case in point, Rising Tide Music Press, right? The composers who are the bedrock of this new and upcoming organization. How do those people get on those lists? What music are these list makers considering, and how do the scores end up in those hands for that consideration? So in order to be vetted for quality, right? So if quality is the key driving factor in the development of lists that educators will go to in order to select curricular materials for their students, in order to be vetted, those composers and their works need to be present. They need to have a seat at the table. Alyssa said that, at Temple University, we ran a 4-week course that was focused on composer diversity in instrumental music. And I think it was Alyssa who said this. She said in the first symposium meeting, she says, allow us the chance, just like anyone else, to have the opportunity to fail. And I'm going to add to that. And in so doing, also give us a chance to succeed. We can't do either if we're not at the table. And so we have to move that very elitist group from this to this for all kinds of really good reasons that focus on social justice and equity. Super lists, that which is, there's lists and then there's the bigger list, right? The bigger lists are the lists of the lists. They compile all those things that are out there and exist individually in states and through academicians. And the perpetuation of the problem is found in the super list. Research studies over the past 60 plus years, researchers have investigated the frequency of literature performance. And those studies get published, and somehow, and let me just take an aside. How does this happen? Well, those researchers, they do bean counting, right? They take, say, for example, university programs, choir programs, orchestra programs, band programs, fill in the blank. And they start looking at the titles and the composers and count the number of times those pieces have been publicly performed. And those pieces of music rise to the top. Why? Because they've been performed a number of times. Well, that's all well and good, but somehow or another, that gets translated to a master list of what should be programming, and it becomes erroneously, it gives us a false impression that these are the best pieces of music, and we should be programming these pieces of music over and over and over again. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of good stuff in those lists, right? Good literature. But the problem is that as those pieces get programmed, and as we go to those lists and we start to select more and more and more often off of those lists, it perpetuates itself, right? That marginalization also is perpetuated because new composers, marginalized composers, composers of diversity do not have that opportunity to rise to the top because the music is not being programmed and not being performed at the same rate. The question becomes, then where does the problem begin? And it really is a chicken and egg situation. Does it begin when we're babies, and what do our parents choose to let us listen to and let us dance to? Does it begin in the public schools and the musical experiences that we have as kindergartners, as sixth graders, in middle school, as we get focused on our participation in ensembles? Does it perpetuate in the high schools? Does it begin in the high schools? Does it begin when people determine that they want to go to college to be composers, to be educators, to be performers? And my take on this is, the question I guess I should ask is, where do we break the cycle? Where in the cycle do we need to break in? And the short answer to that, my friends, is everywhere. Everywhere. Every single point in that cycle, we need to break in and stop the cycle of what we've always done, right? So we have to ask ourselves, who enters the profession? How do we get there? If youngsters have a very limited view of what is afforded to them as far as the music that they get to choose, and it's very, very limited, youngsters may not see themselves as having an opportunity to do that, right? And so how do we get there? Well, we model in the schools. We reach out to composers. We bring composers in. We bring all kinds of composers in to give a face and a name to what is possible, to help children to understand what their own creative processes are. We need to, we heard about a little bit already about providing opportunities, and teachers in particular are really the power holders here in providing opportunities for all youngsters to be able to fill their musical palettes with all kinds of music and provide systematic instruction that will allow every child to see themselves and see possibilities for themselves. We have the responsibility to remove barriers. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we have to go out and find money, right? We talked to Alyssa about that. She was able to do that for Rising Tide Music Press. And now we are off and running. Good, good, good. If you are, even if you look at yourself as, well, I can't do that because I'm just a 7th grade orchestra teacher in Beaumont, Texas. I can't do anything. Absolutely, you can do something. There are ways to find money and and identify resources, and we can help. Your colleagues can help. You're not in this alone. We need to be able to remove barriers by providing time for our children, right? So not just the best of the best of the best. Those kids are going to go off to Allstate or whatever, but every child who may not have opportunities, who may be barred from private instruction because there's no funding, who may be barred from private instruction because they're not allowed to play their instrument at home because dad works the night shift and has to sleep during the day. So there's all kinds of issues that we can help with. But in order to do any of this, we have to have the will, and the will needs to translate into action. And finally, certainly not least, we need to be able to have the guts to talk to institutes of higher education to help shift values. We have to look at the musical canon in the face and say, this has to change, right? And finally, well, I already said finally, but I'll underscore, we need to make sure that there are seats at the table. You know, the table is not finite. It is not just this big. The table needs to be infinite. And if you find that there's not enough seats at the table, you need to be the one. I need to be the one to go out and find another chair and set it down to make sure that there are seats at the table for people who have been left out of the conversation. So I'm winding up. What will you do? What will you do? I'm talking to each one of us individually. Later today, we're going to be talking about turning the ship. That's the pre-K-12 music education question. It's going to be one of the things that we'll be focusing on. Moving the steering wheel of a steamship. It's hard to do, but it begins now, and it begins today with each of us. Each of us here has a voice. And some of you have megaphones. Some of you are far more powerful in terms of all those things we talked about previously in terms of privilege, right? If you find yourself with a lot of privilege, then you have a bigger megaphone than maybe somebody else. And that megaphone comes with responsibility. What are you going to do with that voice? What are you going to do with that, that megaphone that you have? Conversations have to happen like these that we will have today. They have to happen. They are the bedrock of, seeding the fertile ground. Changing the world one note at a time, though, has to do with taking these conversations and moving what we learn into what we are doing then to make a difference. We need to actively seek those like the composers of the Rising Tide Music Press and others who are there and working and have great musical things to contribute, but whose paths to recognition, exposure, and belonging have been strewn with obstacles. We have to be frank and open and understand that there will be moments of uneasiness and difficulty. Like, it's the difficulty of, I like to think of the hourglass, like when they're at the top of the hourglass, all those sands are kind of moving around and it's fun and it's easy and it's cool, but those sands are moving towards the throat. And the throat is a very hard place to get through. That's where the difficulty occurs. But if you get through that difficulty, you find yourself back down at the bottom, right? Which really is kind of a bad word. It's not the bottom, it's the next big window where you can kind of dance around again, right? So in order for progress to be made, the difficulty is inevitable, but it needs to be embraced so that learning occurs. So today may be a little bit difficult for all of us, and that means we're growing. So I'm going to ask you today, what will your takeaways be? What will your takeaways lead to? So be listening and thinking with an intent heart and intent consciousness, intent mind. After the day is over, I want you to take some time, and I will do this too, I promise. Take some time for reflection. Which note in the chord will you change? What one note will you shift to make a difference? What will you do? Capital D, capital O. What will you do to serve the world better? I think we need to continue to have conversations, and conversations since the death of George Floyd have blossomed, right? Tragic tragedy that led to, we need to do something finally, right? And good for us that we are taking up that baton and we're running with it. We need to continue to have those conversations. We also need to be able to make a habit of listening to, seeking first to understand the varied and individual lived experiences that inform who we are and what we do. If we don't listen, we will be doomed. We will fail to understand. So listening is a key component in this process. We need to reflect on our own practices to determine what biases, implicit and otherwise, we are perpetrating and perpetuating. And we need to do whatever we can to change those behaviors. Here's some examples, right? Purposeful, intentional programming. That was one of the suggestions from, I should say this. We talked about intentional and purposeful programming, which led to a suggestion from one of our symposium conversations where somebody said, hey, we're going to add composer photos to the programs. And what does that do? It's an easy way to shrink the cloak of invisibility. If people see who our composers are, we are much more likely to connect with who they should be in the process. We need to be modeling in our classrooms. We talked a little bit about this before, modeling our own good behavior, bringing people in to help model so that our children see possibilities. We need to become inclusive and intentional consumers. If you have if you have ways to buy music, if you have ways to consume music through your job, we need to make sure that we are being intentional about that. We need to be insistent educators who call out equity and not accept lists that marginalize. We need to volunteer for equity work in your schools, in districts and states. Find those composers who have been hidden from us and curate resources to make access easier for everyone. Become the example for your peers. What will your takeaways be, and what will you do next? That needs to be top of mind as you listen today and as all of us participate in these sessions. And so I'm going to ask you these two questions I'll leave you with. If not us, then who? And if not now, then when? Have a great symposium today. I will look forward to these conversations. Thank you again, Alyssa, for letting me share my thoughts.
My goodness, just my goodness. I don't know about y'all, but I just kept, I just kept waving my hands around. I am really, really excited about everything that I just heard. Everyone you can hear me okay, right? I got the little dialogue box that said I couldn't be heard, but I think I'm all right. Thank you so much, Deb, for all of that. My notes are full already, and I'm really excited to pick up that charge and tackle my mindset in the ways that you have challenged, and we'll check in on all of the wonderful things that you said, the great points throughout the day.